The internet died at midnight, and that was when everything changed. By sunrise, the HOA president had started a war she could not win. Ethan worked from home, relying on steady Wi-Fi to keep his quiet life afloat. His house sat at the edge of a polished HOA neighborhood, where rules mattered more than people. For months, the HOA president, Linda, had complained that Ethan's router antenna looked industrial and disruptive. He followed every rule, submitted every form, and kept records of every approval. Still, one evening, the connection vanished. No warning. No notice. Just silence. When Ethan called his provider, the answer stunned him. Someone had accessed the shared utility panel and disabled his service manually. The provider logged the action, flagged it as unauthorized, and asked if he wanted to file a report. Ethan didn't answer right away. He walked outside and saw Linda's car parked near the utility shed, engine still warm. That was the moment curiosity turned into concern. Because Linda hadn't just crossed a boundary. She had touched something far bigger than HOA rules, and Ethan sensed the truth would unravel everything next. Ethan didn't confront her immediately, and that silence made the tension worse. Instead, he started documenting everything with calm precision. He reviewed HOA bylaws, service agreements, and federal communications guidelines late into the night. Every page told the same story. Internet access wasn't just a convenience anymore. It was protected infrastructure. Interfering with it was not a policy dispute. It was a serious violation. The next morning, Ethan emailed the HOA asking for clarification, keeping his tone neutral. Linda replied within minutes, confident and sharp. She claimed the HOA had temporary authority to disable services that violated community standards. That single sentence changed everything. Ethan forwarded it to his provider and a regulatory compliance office. Within hours, he received a call. The representative spoke slowly, carefully, and confirmed what Ethan already suspected. No HOA had that authority. Not ever. Especially not without notice. Meanwhile, Linda began spreading rumors that Ethan was unstable, difficult, and non-cooperative. Neighbors avoided eye contact. The pressure was deliberate. But Ethan stayed quiet, because the more she talked, the more evidence she created. And soon, that evidence would speak louder than any complaint ever could. 3 days later, a white government vehicle rolled into the neighborhood. That was when Linda's confidence finally cracked. The agent introduced himself politely and asked to inspect the utility access point. Linda arrived seconds later, smiling too hard, insisting it was all a misunderstanding. The agent didn't argue. He simply asked who had authorized the interference. Linda gestured vaguely, referencing HOA authority again. The agent nodded, took notes, and requested her email correspondence. Neighbors gathered quietly as the agent explained that internet service disruption could affect emergency access, employment, and protected communications. Each word drained color from Linda's face. This wasn't about antennas anymore. It wasn't about aesthetics. It was about accountability. Ethan stood back, watching the narrative flip in real time. The agent restored service on the spot and issued a formal notice. Linda tried to interrupt, but the agent continued, calm and firm. Further interference would trigger penalties and oversight. As the vehicle drove away, Linda stood frozen, surrounded by people who suddenly understood the gravity of what she'd done. Ethan returned inside, Wi-Fi restored, knowing the real consequences hadn't even begun yet. The HOA emergency meeting was called that same evening, but it wasn't Ethan who was on trial anymore. Linda opened the meeting with rehearsed language about safety and standards, but the room felt different. Neighbors asked questions she couldn't deflect. Someone read the notice aloud. Another neighbor asked why no warning was issued. The silence stretched painfully. Ethan finally spoke, calmly explaining how the outage affected his work and why he'd escalated the issue. He didn't accuse. He didn't raise his voice. That restraint made his words land harder. Linda tried to justify her decision, but each explanation contradicted the last. A vote was called to suspend her authority pending review. The motion passed quickly. Shock rippled across the room. Linda stood up, hands shaking, and left without another word. Later that night, Ethan received confirmation that a compliance investigation had officially opened. The HOA would be required to revise procedures, retrain leadership, and submit to oversight. The power structure that once isolated him was now collapsing under its own weight. And the neighborhood would never operate the same way again. News travels fast when authority falls. By morning, the story had reached every corner of the community. Neighbors who once avoided Ethan now nodded in quiet respect. Some apologized. Others admitted they were afraid to challenge Linda before. The HOA board issued a public statement acknowledging the violation and promising transparency. Ethan read it carefully, noticing how carefully her name was avoided. Linda resigned 2 days later. No speech. No explanation. Just a brief email sent through the HOA system she once controlled. The investigation continued, but its outcome was already clear. Policies were rewritten. Access controls were locked down. Training became mandatory. Ethan didn't celebrate. He simply returned to his routine, grateful for peace. But something deeper had shifted. The neighborhood learned that rules without restraint become weapons. And leadership without limits invites disaster. One quiet evening, Ethan sat on his porch, working smoothly online, watching the sun fade behind identical rooftops. The silence felt earned. Yet he knew the story wasn't just about Wi-Fi. It was about standing firm when quiet lines are crossed, and trusting the truth to surface. Weeks later, the final notice arrived in Ethan's inbox. The case was closed, and the violation confirmed. The agency's language was formal but decisive. The interference was unlawful. The corrective actions were accepted. No further penalties were required due to cooperation after discovery. Ethan exhaled, tension releasing at last. The HOA elected new leadership, promising openness and restraint. Meetings became calmer. Rules became clearer. Ethan attended once, simply to listen. No one challenged him. No one needed to. What lingered most was the lesson. Power doesn't always shout. Sometimes it disconnects quietly, hoping no one will notice. Linda had assumed silence meant control. She never imagined it meant preparation. Ethan closed his laptop that night, reflecting on how close he came to backing down. If he had, nothing would have changed. Instead, the truth froze the very person who tried to erase his voice. And that realization stayed with him, steady and grounding, long after the screens went dark. The neighborhood moved on, but the story never faded. It became a reminder whispered whenever rules felt too heavy. Ethan's life returned to normal, yet stronger. He hadn't sought conflict, only fairness. And when it mattered, he chose patience over fear. The HOA never interfered again, not with him or anyone else. Boundaries were respected because consequences were understood. Sometimes, justice isn't loud. Sometimes, it arrives through paperwork, clarity, and calm resolve. Linda learned that too late. Ethan learned it just in time, and that was the final twist in this unbelievable HOA story. If you love the drama, don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop a comment sharing your thoughts. It really helps this channel grow.